Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The future of the fairgrounds, tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. We're joined tonight by Marvin Stockwell, co-founder, Friends of the Fairgrounds. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Paul Young is Director of Housing and Community Development for the city. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Fred Jones, founder, the Southern Heritage Classic. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
And Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So I'll start with you, Paul. I was looking back, I think this is maybe the third or fourth show we've done, and I probably started every single one as the future of the fairgrounds, as I now think about it. But there have been plans, there's been a lot of talk. Is this planning process different than the others?
I think it's different in that we are starting with the premise that we're using the previous planning efforts as insight for how we move forward. We're not starting with a blank slate because we understand that the community has given a lot of input on this site, and so we want to take the input that's been received to date and try to put it on an aggressive timeline. As many people know, we have a significant opportunity to utilize what is called the Tourism Development Zone, TDZ, as we always refer to it, and this allows us to use it allows us to use the growth in sales taxes beyond the increment that exists today. And so what that does is it allows us to finance improvements in a way that is neutral to the city. And so we want to make sure
sales taxes already being paid that go to the state.
Exactly. And so if we build something at the fairgrounds that will draw a large number of people, presumably those people will spend money in and around the fairgrounds. So areas like Cooper Young, Orange Mound, Overton Square, we want to see those areas benefit from this boom and take those sales taxes from the money that those people spend to finance improvements at the fairgrounds.
Okay, and we'll go deeper into some of those, how those things work so we'll come back to some of that. But Marvin Stockwell, you all co-founded Friends of the Fairground in 2015, I think?
Early 2016.
Okay,
Yeah.
and tell people who don't know what Friends of the Fairgrounds is.
So Friends of the Fairgrounds, we had a stakeholder input process where we talked to all of the organizational stakeholders on or adjacent to the fairgrounds and all the neighborhoods around, so Orange Mound, Cooper Young, Beltline, Humes Heights, my neighborhood, Chickasaw Gardens, Glenview, and Edwin Circle. And we just said, what do you all want to see the fairgrounds become? And what we got was a picture of community needs that these neighbors and the organizational stakeholders said they'd like to see the fairgrounds address. What I'm encouraged about the current process is that all of our vision doc called Heart of the City has been included in the materials that we're being asked to review amongst the old plans. So I'm encouraged that everything we learned will also inform the process. And the reason we're still involved is because we're really encouraged by the transparency that we've seen, and we hope that will continue. And we hope that we can find that win-win where we have something that fulfills the requirements of the TDZ application, leaves open the possibility for other ideas, other funding streams, and also keeps in mind the needs that the stakeholders have addressed.
Right, and we'll come back to you and get some of the input you heard through all the process. But let me get Fred involved. Fred, the Southern Heritage Classic has been held at Liberty Bowl since when?
1990.
And for people who don't know what it is, and give us your pitch, give us your history and what the significance of the game.
Well, it started off at this football game between Tennessee State and Jackson State, but we had developed it into a really big community celebration, and it has kind of taken on a life of its own. Yeah. But the idea originally was just football game. But when you add entertainment, when you add the community, when you add economic development, tourism, all of that became a part of what is now the Southern Heritage Classic. But it started off with just this football game.
And for you, I mean, this, as you just said, this very successful game that's become more than a game. For you, the Liberty Bowl and the fairgrounds have worked. I mean, are you wary of change, or are you excited about the possibility of more improvements around that area?
I'm not worried of change because it's changed already. I mean, you go from when we started, you know, you had a lot of cattle barns and everything out there. Now we got a clear space called Tiger Lane. So being in the business that I'm in and been in a really long time, you adapt to change, you know, but you just have to, whatever's going to happen, you want to be able to coexist in what's going, what's there. Right. So we could adapt to the change. There are certain things that they like to keep in mind.
Right, such as, and then we're going to build it. Go ahead.
The biggest thing is, you know, how we can accommodate all these people.
Yeah, which is in part just a simple issue of parking and transit, right, and getting people in, getting people out.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of factors in that, and hopefully, in this planning process, they will keep that in mind. Mm-hmm. Because, for instance, right now, I've got 500 tailgate spots that they all been sold since August 1st.
Yeah.
So, and the event is not until September 9.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's something that you had to keep in mind. But I want to make clear that I'm not against change.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we are able to exist in this change, whatever this change ends up being.
Bill.
So, to that point, Fred, can these large events that fill the Liberty Bowl, 65,000 seats plus, and a lot of tailgating, people who are tailgating who might just go to that and not to the game. How difficult is it to coexist with new uses at the fairground? I guess it depends on the geography and where those new uses are and new facilities are.
Well, I think that, you know, Paul mentioned earlier about the UL, the land.
Urban Land Institute study.
Mm-hmm. In that study, they did not mention a football game. So, you know, the football games are going to be here. They, for me, you got 10,000 plus people tailgating. You'll have 40, 50,000 people at the game. What are we going to do with all of these people, with all of these other things going on? So it just being a part of the process, not to dictate what's going to happen, but whatever happens, you keep that in mind that a major happening is going to happen at this fairgrounds. And for us, the happening impacts the entire city. You know, so it's not what just happens at the fairgrounds. You spread out all over town, have a major impact. So that's always been my concern. But again, I want to repeat this again. It's not about being against change, but when you make these changes, can this football game, the way it is right now, and you hope it's going to get bigger. Mm-hmm. 3 or 4 years from now, you hope that you have more people. What you're going to do with them? Where you're going to put them? So that's my concern.
For Paul, talking about the plan, I think sometimes I've certainly been guilty of it, of just focusing on, okay, what can you do here? What can you do here? To Fred's point, your plan, your set of recommendations, is it going to involve more than that? Is it going to address those questions like transit, how you move people, and where they go?
Absolutely. I mean, we understand completely where Fred is coming from. We know how significant this game is to this city, and not just this game, but the University of Memphis and AutoZone Liberty Bowl. We know what economic impact that brings to this community, and so anything that we do has to be respectful of how we accommodate those users on those days. Our goal is to try to figure out how to maximize use of the site. We have, we give, just say it's a whole weekend for each of those events. That's 27 days that the space is activated. And so we have another 330 days that we want to activate the site. So we're trying to figure out what uses can bring people to the site, accommodate them, move people around in a way that's efficient. We're looking at strategies that range from how we can use shuttles to park, and I've heard people say people in Memphis don't use shuttles, but when you have significant events like this, maybe that is an option. How can we find ways to get people to and from in an efficient manner? So that's definitely something that we're looking at.
So Marvin, what's your view on this as someone who's talked a lot about future possibilities on this?
Sure.
Is there a point at which Fred's reality, the reality of the Tigers, the reality of the AutoZone Liberty Bowl, does that kind of influence what you've seen? Because to some degree, there has been a tendency to look at this as a blank slate, I think.
Sure.
And Fred mentioned the ULI study, which didn't consult some folks heavily involved in this.
Right. Our existing assets meeting jumps to mind as a great example. I mean, the way we've looked at it from the moment is that, from the outset, is that the fairgrounds are not living up to its potential. So obviously, we already have some fantastic assets at the fairgrounds. But our existing assets meeting, we got out maps and we said, which of these assets are great and working at full capacity? Which ones are great amenities, but they could be used more? And what are some of the missing amenities that might make the existing ones succeed at a larger level? And there were lots of great ideas that stemmed from that. So, like, I don't see them, all these things, as diametrically opposed, or I think it's finding the right mix of amenities to, like Paul said, maximize use of the space, to get rid of those fence lines, welcome the community in, welcome tourists in, finding the right balance between, one of the things that came through with our stakeholders is they want the fairgrounds reimagined with them in mind. They don't want to be kept out, they want to be welcomed in. But they are okay with it if it's something that tourists also love. And I feel like that's the sweet spot. If Memphis can put heads and hearts together and figure that out, then we can check the tourism boxes that the TDZ requires, but also deliver on what our stakeholders are saying they want. So I think there are a lot of smart people around this civic table trying to figure this out, and I have every confidence we will in a way that makes us all win on a larger level.
What is the timeline on the TDZ application?
So our goal is to submit an application by the end of the year. And the reason that we want to submit it by the end of the year is because it's been 10 years since the initial application was submitted. And while there is no firm deadline for the TDZ application to expire, we know that time is of the essence. And so we've been dealing with this issue for the past 10 years. And it's time for us to really come to a conclusion as a community as to whether we're going to maximize this opportunity or not.
And there's some talk, and so the TDZ, just get into the weeds here a little bit, it would be approved by the
State Building Commission.
Okay, and TDZ was done around the university area, like Highland Row, Highland Strip, is that correct?
That was actually a TIF.
That's a TIF. Okay,
Yeah,
I get these
tax
all mixed
increment
up.
financing.
I know after 8 years I know what a pilot is, but I get the TDZ and the TIF. That's my new, in the next 8 years I'm gonna master that. So there's some concern though that the state is maybe going to end TDZs. I've certainly read that.
Well, the state has ended TDZs,
okay.
And that's part of our urgency. Is this is the last TDZ that can be approved by the state,
okay,
because
so
we submitted our letter before 2007.
That's what I was confused about. Okay, so the kind of improvements, well, go through a few. Over the years, things have been talked about. A brewery in the Coliseum was recently talked about. There was ULI suggested a water park. There's certainly been suggestions of retail, housing, just kind of traditional development. Which of these, anything that is developed, would it be city-owned, city dollars, or is it private investors? Is it selling off the land? What is the vision of how all that would work?
So the city will not sell the land. Our goal is to work out a land lease for whatever happens there, similar to what happened at the Pyramid. We still own the building, but the building is being leased. So we are leaning towards that direction in terms of the land uses that have been proposed. Things like you said, retail. I think at one time they were calling for 400,000 square feet of retail, which, that was in a different era before big box kind of went out of style. And now the plan is for, in the ULI study, at least 22,000 square feet of retail, which we think is much more reasonable.
And that would not be the city, just so people understand, that's not the city getting into the drugstore business. It's a lease with some entity of some sort of bidding process.
Right. We would have to do a process for a master developer who would come in and pull together other financing. The TDZ would be used for infrastructure. Those
infrastructure I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could infrastructure include a parking garage? Is that the kind of thing that might be?
Absolutely. I mean, that's certainly one of the things that we're looking at. We know that parking is a major concern, and we think that structured parking allows us to be able to accommodate more cars in a finite area.
Yeah. It is interesting to think about, and I'll turn to you, Fred. Just in the years that we've been doing shows on this and writing about it in the last 5 years, one thing that's really changed. Paul mentioned the changes in big box retail. Some people would say, thank God we didn't build 400,000 square feet of retail space there because it'd probably be half empty. But the other thing is U of M football got good. They back 3-4 years ago, they weren't drawing many people at all, and now they're drawing people. Right. It gets back, that dynamic, I mean, in terms of thinking about changes in college football and a planning process that looks forward. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I've always said that if the University of Memphis was averaging 35 or 40,000 people a game, the whole dynamic, the whole conversation would change. It would just change because these events are so dynamic in what they have outside. You have the number at the stadium, but they impact so much more. Mm-hmm. So to have this on a consistent basis, it's like going to UT Knoxville on Vols Day when it's 100,000 people there. That's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
And so the conversations for us, not only when you have these football games, and that's why it becomes important to think about them in this process, because we all hope that the University of Memphis football program continues to grow, because that's going to be better for our city in the long term.
Do you all do any kind of estimates on economic impact from Southern Heritage Classic?
Yeah. In fact, the University of Memphis did mine. The last one, they've done 3 of them. The last one, the benefit to the city on the weekend is $21 million.
Yeah.
So, and we didn't put all the numbers in.
But that's things like people they come in town, they go to restaurants, they stay in hotels, they're spending money. Because it's beyond, I mean, there's football, and people watching may or may not be football fans, but part of this is just pure economics and economic development.
Well, again, I mentioned that earlier, it's economic. Where we started from was just a game, but it's evolved into more than that. And that's why in this planning for the fairgrounds, we have to keep that in mind, that these types of things for any of these games are the same way.
Right.
The more success the games are, more people, the head count, it's going to have a big impact on this community. There's no question about that.
Yeah. Bill.
So Marvin, if your wish comes true and there is a fairgrounds conservancy at the end of this process, still to be determined on that, how do you think that conservancy should balance what he's talking about, that tremendous economic impact, with trying to have other catalysts on the fairgrounds property as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that is the thing that I keep coming back to about having a public-private partnering organization to help manage the land over time. Not only the redevelopment process of it, but let's say it's 5 years from now and all the construction is done and all the tenants are in place. What is the mechanism by which all of those tenants talk to each other? Because again, I think that's part of what can make everyone win on a larger level is the coordination. Now, sitting here today, I don't know what that mix of amenities is or will be, but obviously I think you have to balance the needs of all users. No one wants to do anything that's going to take something away from the Southern Heritage Classic. We, of course, want it to continue to grow. We want the U of M program to continue to grow. My overarching goal is just to see something that's right in the center of our city be all it can be, to be a vibrant center of more activity and to be used more often than it is. The particular mix of amenities, whether or not there's a parking garage certainly seems likely to me, whether we reopen the Coliseum or not, which I think people are starting to realize that's not so undoable. Although I know has a host of things that would fill in its own show. But I think there are. It's impossible to know exactly which mix of amenities we'll end up with, but I think they can all work in harmony. They can all make each other better. Mm-hmm. That's what I'd like to see, and I'm sure that's what Paul's dreaming about too.
Well, and Paul, not to put the cart before the horse, but tell me what you think at the outset of this about the idea of a conservancy. Do you need, as he said, some kind of mechanism in there?
I think it's all driven by what actually happens with the planning process, what actually goes on the site, what would the conservancy conserve. Right now, our Parks Division handles all of the lease agreements with University of Memphis and Southern Heritage Classic and Liberty Bowl. So we would have to figure out what exactly the responsibilities for a conservancy would be. Mm-hmm. But I think the city's open to the idea. We also need to figure out what assets physically go on the site. Mm-hmm. Right now, I think it's important to note that the site is already excellent. There are great things that are happening at the fairgrounds today with the Children's Museum, with all of the events that are hosted around football, with the stakeholders that we just mentioned, with the Kroc Center. All of these assets are excellent. Right now at the STEAM Academy, Maxine Smith STEAM Academy has been excellent for this community. So we want to build around those existing excellent assets.
Someone mentioned the Coliseum. Paul Young, what's going to happen with the Coliseum?
I don't know. I don't know. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was telling them, I'm a fan of the Coliseum. I graduated from high school at the Coliseum. I think it's a great structure, but our goal is to make sure that the numbers make sense. It's a $20 to $30 million investment, and we have to make sure that the numbers pencil out, and we're going to let data determine our decision making. And whatever happens with the Coliseum, we want to be respectful of the opinions of the community, but we also know that 20 to 30 million is a lot of money that we have to figure out how we use it in an effective way. Is
it possible to I mean, you've got this TDZ deadline and that money that's potentially out there, but you've also got, I mean, if you break it down, there's the Coliseum is a big question. Then there's a whole lot of just open green space. Right. What is it possible that certain things are settled in this planning process and questions like the Coliseum are left unanswered as part of this?
Yeah, that's definitely possible. Okay. In fact, that's one of the things that we've talked about with some of the stakeholders, that every issue may not be resolved by the end of this year. What we want to do is identify what is the big draw, what's the thing that really anchors this TDZ for this community. And if we have not figured out all the answers to every component on the fairgrounds, we can continue to work on those pieces of the project.
Marvin, back to the neighborhood meetings you had. I mean, what do neighbors want? I mean, do they just want park space? I mean, do they want to see retail? Do they want to see, I mean, is every neighborhood a little different?
Sure.
I mean, what are they calling for?
Yeah, no, there are some overarching themes. The biggest being that they want the fairgrounds reimagined with them in mind. They feel like they have not been sufficiently welcomed in. They miss the connection with that land that they once had, and they want it back. Quite frankly, they miss the connection with the Mid-South Coliseum, and the WDIA shows that happened there. They miss, they remember a time when their teenagers got their first good job at Liberty Land, and I'm not sitting here proposing that we rebuild Liberty Land by any stretch, but that is a desire that the stakeholders articulated. Jobs came through really strongly. It's not lost on them that the western extension of the Green Line is going to go to Flicker Street, and that the likely extension of the Green Line through the fairgrounds would also, when you add on to the proposed bike share program, might really open up a 5-mile radius around the fairgrounds, especially if, and here's another thing, they see it as an ideal mass transit node. Do I know how to solve those things today? I don't, but our stakeholders want it to be a safe, fair place for everyone with forward-facing, healthy amenities where families can go and enjoy and fellowship together, and they want healthy things for their families to be able to do.
Yeah, Fred, from your point of view, I mean, if you just be selfish for a second, just think about the Southern Heritage Classic. What are the one or two things you would love to see done that would, is it a hotel? Is it restaurants there? Is it amenities for the event that would be the thing you would say, that's what I would love to have?
Well, being selfish, I wouldn't propose anything specifically for the Southern Heritage Classic. It would have to be city-driven for me, community-driven, where it makes sense. And I've been on the record for a long time with this, that the Coliseum is special to me, because at one time I was on the board of the Coliseum. Elvis is here now, and I remember seeing one of the Elvis's, I saw Elvis's last show that he performed at the Coliseum. So, but for me, it has to be about what the community, something that the community can embrace, because as I said earlier, I'll adapt to the change. But we got to, today, people expect to be serviced and accommodated when they come to an event. As big as the stadium is, as big as the FedEx Forum is, it's the Orpheum, it doesn't matter, Landers Center, they want to have some accommodations, and definitely need to do that.
All right, well, we will give you the last word right there. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.